personnel carrier, or APC. And you know, here at Tank Saturday, you can get a ride in those over at the ride station. This vehicle came out in these vehicles came out since 1960, and believe it or not, here in 2024, they're still in use by the Canadian Armed Forces, and many of these have actually ended up in Ukraine. A lot of NATO countries donated their M113s to the Ukrainian government. But the later version you'll see in a moment is known as the TLAV, or Tracked Light Armored Vehicle. But basically it is an old Cold War era M113. Now, from the 60s and the 90s, you know, these were on the plains in Germany, and imagine to be in some sort of Cold War conflict. They had with lots of rivers. They were slightly amphibious. On the front of the vehicle, there's usually a bow plane, like you can see on the ones that you can get a ride on. They got rid of the bow plane. They put a kit rack up there, additional steps so that the crew could get up onto the vehicle. But what is key is this new track. Tracked Light TLAV, a Tracked Light Armored Vehicle. So it's not a tank, once again, it's an armored personnel carrier. But look at this one. This one actually has a turret. So we're obviously in a combat situation, the driver would not have their head out of the hatch like that. They would be hatched down looking through the vision blocks. They're also incredibly maneuverable. When you hear this around, and once again when they parade together, listen to the difference in the engine of the TLAV. The TLAV can also do that. It can actually do a full pivot. It could turn 360 degrees all the way around. So it gave the vehicle that much more maneuverability. So we'll have John will spin it again this way. What was actually done is they took those old Cold War M113s, they cut them in half, and she had 6 road wheels instead of the 5 that are on the M113. That gave it space inside for that turret basket, so it could have that turret operator in that basket with vision all the way around the vehicle, and still have room to move troops, to be an armored ambulance, or to bring special supplies to a dangerous zone. And here's an interesting adaptation. This is an MTVE, or Mobile Vehicle Tracked Engineer. So here again you have that extended M113 TLAV platform, but this one has engineering equipment on it to assist the troops and the military engineers in building roads, sometimes unfortunately in building defensive positions. So it has that large dozer blade on the front, still has the turret with that 30 cal and a 50 cal machine gun. Notice on this turret also those black things, there's 4 on each side. Those are smoke launchers. Alright, we're going to have all 3 of the APC variants from the Afghanistan conflict go by, so you can then compare them. Now you know a little bit more. Send out the APCs. Going into a conflict with equipment for the last war. We have the M113 A2 APC armored personnel carrier, which is in its early configuration to a TLAV or tracked light armored vehicle of the Canadian Armed Forces, an adaptation made in the field in Afghanistan. And again, these are tracked vehicles, but listen, you hear their engines, but you really don't hear their tracks. They're much quieter than a traditional tracked vehicle. On the M113, you can see on the back, it just has that big family hatch. The crew commander does have a machine gun mount, but it's completely exposed if using it. The M113A3 TLAV tracked light armored vehicle with a Kodiak gauge turret, small liner, upgraded engine, and an important part of Canada's mission are engineering equipment like the MTVE, Military Tracked Vehicle Light. So now to hopefully is a familiar vehicle for you. Here we get into a combat vehicle developed right here in Canada and produced in London, Ontario. It has an animal name that is rarely used. It's known as the Kodiak. But this is the LAV-3, or Light Armored Vehicle Generation 3. It was the main combat vehicle used by our troops. And as you can see, it's very quick. It's a wheeled vehicle. It's an 8-wheeled vehicle. They came out in 1998, 1999, so they weren't that old when we got to the conflict in Afghanistan. You can see it's a fully turreted vehicle. It has a turret with a crew commander and a gunner. There's the option to actually have a machine gun. You can see that the crew commander there is showing off the machine gun mount. Massive firepower with a 25mm main weapon. It has the smoke launchers. It has a turret that can traverse 360 degrees. It's fairly well armored and it's fast. Now, I'm going to show off the turret there to you. There's a Bushmaster cannon, the 25mm. Now, these were APCs also, armored personnel carriers. At the back of the vehicle is a ramp that drops down, and infantry can deploy from or can be extracted from a situation inside the LAV-3. Another great advancement that the troops really appreciated in Afghanistan, and I think maybe the crew is using it today, since the driver's hatch is down, is the vehicle had air conditioning, where lots of the older vehicles that we sent there did not have. And you can imagine on a hot day, like amazingly hot day here in September, what it was like during the day in Afghanistan being in these armored vehicles. So the front of the vehicle, that large knife-like blade, that is a wire cutter, just like the early wire cutters we saw. The vehicle has different positions. On the back of this vehicle, you see that large storage box. Now, the soldiers apparently call that the coffin. So if that's on the back of the vehicle, that means that this vehicle was for moving infantry around, not to be used in a reconnaissance role, because obviously if he spins the turret around, the storage bin is going to be in his line of fire. There you go. Thank you. Notice when the driver turns the wheel that both axles on the front of the vehicle turn. So the older versions, like the AVGP, or Armored Vehicle General Purpose, that you see in our museum, that came out at the end of the 70s and were used in the 80s and 90s, they couldn't be as long. They only had 2 front turning wheels. Now this vehicle, despite its size, and when you see it going around again, it can have a really tight turning radius because it had those 2 front axles. Again, it was designed, built, and deployed from Canada, and it's still to this day the basis of many military vehicles. Our allies, the United States, New Zealand and Australia purchased these vehicles, just top of mind, and they still have them in service today. There is our Canadian LAV-3 Kodiak. It's a wheel combat vehicle, and you're thinking, well, what happens if someone shoots a tire, I always hear. It has exceptionally advanced systems. It has self-inflating tires. Now, the LAV-3, although a much better combat vehicle, it wasn't produced again for that conflict. And there's lots of lessons that we learned about deploying the LAV-3, casualties we had, injuries that soldiers had, and those were all poured into this next vehicle you're going to see. This is the LAV-3 Nanuk, also known as the RWS, or Remote Weapon System. So first off, you see with the Nanuk, it looks like the LAV-3, at least the chassis. There's a couple of differences though. There's no turret. On top, there's actually a remote weapon station. So instead of having a turret that could possibly be exposed to a rocket-propelled grenade or RPG, the crew inside is completely within the armor of the vehicle, and with optics can operate that remote weapon system on top. You can have a C6 general purpose machine gun, or even be upgraded to a 50 caliber machine gun. Now it's also going to show you something, other adaptations that we made to keep our soldiers safe. All clear, ramp down. So on the back of the vehicle, just like the LAV-3, you can see that there's a ramp that's going to come down. It also has a door. The soldiers can open the door. But when they actually took LAV-3s, they sent them back to Canada, and they rebuilt them based on the experiences of soldiers using them and casualty rates out in the field with the LAV. So one of the things they did is they added additional armor to the vehicle. So the vehicle's much slower than the LAV-3. It has 4 tons of additional armor. They had the remote weapon system. They have massive technology and optics. And you'll see this if you can get the vehicle down there. The seats are actually suspended from the floor. We'll talk about that in a bit. Because now here's something that's actually very loud, and is actually a tank. Again, it was purchased for Canada during the Cold War. It is a German-built Leopard 1. More specifically, this is a Canadian Leopard C2. So don't be confused, it's not a Leopard 2, it's a Leopard C2, which is the second variant of Canada's Leopard 1. In 2006, Canada deployed these Leopard 1 tanks to Afghanistan. A Cold War tank. The Taliban, Al-Qaeda of course, didn't have anything like a main battle tank to come up against this. So this gave the Canadians massive striking power, armor, punch, and overwatch capabilities of the valleys and towns that they had to watch over. and that the Taliban, the enemy, didn't really have an answer to. Yes, a lot of tracks were lost. There's even actually a couple unfortunate casualties of Canadian tankers from IEDs and roadside bombs, damage that they suffered inside the armor of the tank. But really, this gave Canada a massive capability. This was quite a story around the world when it happened, that Canada deployed its tanks to Afghanistan. And you wonder why some of the wheeled vehicles have problems in the tank arena, right? So the Leopard 1 main battle tank was developed by Germany, by West Germany, our allies during the Cold War. And it was, even though it was not really battle tested up to this point in a shooting war, it was considered one of the fastest main battle tanks ever produced. So its main weapon, 105 millimeter main weapon. This one here has some additional armor on it, but the ones that we actually sent to Afghanistan had an additional armor package. They knew it was an older tank. They knew the threats that it would be coming up against, so they produced an additional armored version of the Leopard C2. So again, we're going to have to look at the combat vehicles. I'm going to have a word with Jim about the tank donut he left in our tank arena. Okay, so we have the Kodiak, the Canadian LAV-3, Light Armored Vehicle, Generation 3. Just ubiquitous with the Canadian mission in Afghanistan. Built just at the end of the 20th century, coming into the 21st century. But it was really the combat workhorse of the Canadian Armed Forces. The later high technology variant, the RWS, Remote Weapon System, or Nanuk. It's a LAV-3 chassis, upgraded with electronics technology, a remote weapon system, and incredible view of the battlefield, and of course, our Canadian Leopard C2. Again, let's hear it for the Ontarios. Happy birthday.